Kiana Garima. They're a filmmaking couple. They're most known for the film Sankofa, for which this bookstore is named. You can stream that movie on Netflix right now. Also, Sankofa means to go back and fetch it. So often we like to have events here, not only book events, but events that inform the community about what's happening. That's why we're so happy to have PACA and other organizations in the group here, presenting here today. A few things to mention: if you need to use the bathroom, it's right around the corner on the same side as the cafe. If you're hungry, thirsty, please patronize the cafe. And after this event, feel free to peruse the books that we offer. I'm not going to take up too much time. I'm going to bring on Brother Rashid from PACA to talk about why he's here today, why we're all here today.
Thank you, Michaela, and thank you, Sankofa, for offering us this space today for this event. We're here today to talk about militarism, U.S. militarism, and how it's expanding across our different movements and how it's touching our different nations. So again, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for the DC Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression for your efforts today. And we have a couple of organizations not yet part of the alliance that we hope to join sooner than later. So yeah, we can get started. We're going to have Max Remote coming up from Pan-African Community Action with the first presentation. Give us 1 minute for him to set up.
Greetings. Thank you all so much for coming, so we can discuss some of these important topics that we're going to be talking about today. We are, of course, talking about militarization in a broad sense. We are also, of course, talking about Cop City, very particularly in some of the things happening here in DC, very particularly, very specifically. So I want to take a little bit of a step back, however, and talk about some of the things that we should be fighting for, as opposed to merely talking about, although we need to talk about those things that we're fighting against. We're fighting against Cop Cities, we're fighting against police brutality, we're fighting against militarization. Those things define what we're fighting against, but they do not articulate what we are fighting for. And we need to talk about some of those things that we're fighting for and understand the kind of movement that we're actually going. Asada Shakur said, we need to build self-determination in our communities where we can make decisions for ourselves. Malcolm X said that all revolution is based on land, more specifically control over that land. Vladimir Lenin said the key question of every revolution is the question of state power. So PACA in particular, but we think a broader movement as well, is not just fighting to end Cop City. We're not fighting to indict this cop or that one. We're not fighting to even increase the amount of money that the city spends on housing or spends on social services. Not to say that we're not talking about those things and we're not engaged in campaigns around those things, but that's not actually what we're fighting for. We're fighting to wrest power from the hands of white supremacists, patriarchs, and capitalists and their minions, in order to shift that power into the hands of working class African people, for us particularly women and queer folks. So that's what we're fighting for, and that's the world in which that's the world that we are trying to build and trying to move towards. So we want to be clear about that we're fighting for state, ultimately for control over state power. Key to understanding what our position is in this regard is understanding our analysis about what the condition of African people in the United States as well as in other areas in the diaspora are. We assert that Black people in the United States comprise a domestic colony, a colony inside of the United States. So while we traditionally think about colonies as, for example, England in one place and then Ghana someplace else, that is areas that are separated by a great distance, the real definition of colony has nothing to do with the distance between the metropole and the colony. It has to do with the function of the colony as it relates to the metropole. And we assert that Black communities inside of the United States serve the exact same colonial function inside of in the context of the U.S. as Ghana does to England, as any of these other colonized states do to their own metropole. Therefore, what we're fighting for is an end to colonialism, whether that is international or domestic, and a shifting of power. Not just an ending of colonialism and then see where things fall. We want to end colonialism and we want to take power, we want to take control, we want to run things so that we decide what happens inside of our own communities, we decide that what happens in our own land. So that means that while talking about things like defunding the police or abolishing the police are important steps, certainly psychologically, for us to undertake, certainly our communities as a whole, we can't stop there. Because if all we do is defund, then we just create vacuums in which other things other areas are allowed to rise. So we'll spend a moment talking about defund and abolition, and then talking about why community control then we think is the answer, is the solution. So let's say we get together right now, today, and we decide that we want to start a campaign to defund the police in DC or anywhere else, right? So today we agree on that. Tomorrow we get together and we make a plan, an organizing plan. Tuesday we go out and we organize our entire community, the entire city and outlying areas in PG, Montgomery, Virginia, wherever else. And then we shut the city down Wednesday, we shut the city down Thursday. Nothing can happen in this city. Biggest demonstrations in the history of the city. So it's completely shut down. And on Friday, the city cries uncle. We'll meet all of your demands, give us a day to figure out how we're gonna do it. Saturday, the city has an emergency meeting, completely defunds the police, fires every cop, fires every administrator in the police, fires every pencil pusher in the police department. All of them are gone. Sunday, we celebrate. What happens Monday morning? Does Walmart open and say, well, there's no police, I guess we're just gonna open our doors and see what happens, right? Or do they then, Walmart or McDonald's or whatever other major corporation, do they replace the police with their own private security force? Which is not even ostensibly supposed to be following laws which are supposedly made for to apply to everyone, but they're actually just doing the thing that their boss tells them to do. Having been born in Haiti and in an area where there's large parts of the country where there's no police at all, but that does not mean that there's no security, no private security. It doesn't mean that rich people are leaving their doors open so that people who don't have food can come in and get food. Having spent a little bit of time, not a whole lot, in South Africa, where there's large parts of the country with no police. These are areas that do not have the same number of police, don't have the same ubiquity of police forces there, but they have more security forces than the United States does. Right? So the absence of police as a state-funded force does not mean the absence of policing as a function of one group of people hoarding resources at the disadvantage and at the expense of another force. So if we were to win a campaign to defund, that doesn't mean it'd be the end of policing. Even if it would end the police as we now define it. It would just mean that the police as we now define it will be replaced with a different force, with a private force. People who are abolitionists or push for defunding are fond of saying that there were no police as we now know them before the late 1700s or early 1800s, and they came from slave catchers. But back in the time of the Roman Empire, there were taxes. And people weren't paying their taxes voluntarily. They were paying their taxes because there were centurions who were going to their homes and beating them up and taking their taxes out, right? That was policing, even if it wasn't police. Back in the days of King Arthur and other kings throughout Europe, people were paying taxes, but they weren't paying it voluntarily. They were paying it because there were knights and other armed forces who were going around beating people up and taking their money on behalf of the king or on behalf of the queen. And defunding police would not end policing. And this is where we then need to understand the sequence of abolition. Even if we want to get to abolition, abolition has a particular sequence. And the sequence must be followed, or the results will be worse than they are now, if you can believe that. The creation, historically, in the process of human society, policing is a necessity, a necessary outcome of any time there are class formations, anytime there are groups of people who have an antagonistic relationship with each other inside of that society. So one group of people own land and have a fence around it, and another group of people are outside the the fence and are starving and need to do work in order to get some crumbs thrown at them, right? Anytime there's that, there must be policing, even if we don't call that police in the definition that we know today. There must be policing in order to maintain that. Anytime there are classes, there must be policing. Therefore, the only way to end policing is to end classes. There will always be policing whenever there are classes, as long as there are capitalists, whether they are in charge as they are now, or if they're still there but they're no longer running things like they used to be, which would happen after we win, or sometime after we win. There must be policing, because that policing has to prevent the capitalists from polluting the water, polluting the air, and ripping off labor, right? So there has to be, for them, re-seizing power. Even after we win, if there is a group of men who think that men should be able to do whatever they want in any respect, work in a particular place, that women should not be allowed to work, or have as many sexual partners as they want, but women should only have be allowed to have with their husband, there must be policing. Even if there are classes that are based on gender relations or gender norms, there must be policing. If we live in a society, even if we win, and we live in a society, and there's a group of black people who think that someone who is born with a penis can never identify then as a woman and, for example, participate in so-called women's sports, there must be policing in order to enforce that. There's no other way to enforce it. Anytime there are classes, there must be policing. The only way to get rid of policing is to get rid of classes. And our real mission then, in a big picture sense, is to get rid of classes. And we would not have to have a separate movement or a separate protest in order to get rid of police. Police will wither away, as the saying goes, along with the rest of the state. So then this is what we would ultimately be going towards. Of course, that is not a direct trip, a direct road. It is a dangerous and long road. And so we need to think about how do we get there in steps. And we assert that one of the steps here is that we need to be fighting for community control over police. And what we think community control over police means is that there is a force who is out there and they are directly responsible and responsive to the community in which they sit. In 1971, the Black Panther Party got on the ballot in two cities, Berkeley, California, and Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the ballot question calling for community control over police. And that ballot question organized those cities into policing districts. Berkeley was the north, south, east, west, organized in policing districts and called for each district to have its own separate police force, which was then run by a board, all civilian board inside. And that civilian board would have the ability to hire police, the ability to fire police, and the ability to tell police that this is what we want you policing and this is what we do not want you policing. And that would be different from one community to another, just like it is now, except the difference is we just have a bunch of wealthy white people who are telling the police what to do, rather than everyone contributing to the idea of what police should be doing. So we are picking up on that idea, and we're saying that we should have forces that are completely responsible to and who are completely at the mercy of communities which they supposedly serve. And so that would mean that each local community, if we take the District of Columbia, for example, we could organize the District of Columbia into policing districts that map, either they could or they don't have to, that will map identically the wards that exist here, and then put a question on the ballot. And the question, and each ward would vote separately. So each ward would get its same question, but they would vote just like you would vote for council members to go for your ward. Whoever Ward 1 votes for has nothing to do with what Ward 8 votes for, etc. The question would be the same, but each ward would answer that separately. Do you want to keep your existing police force, or do you want to replace that police force with your own community control force? For those communities that vote and say that they want to keep their own police force, great, keep them, you got them. Have them, have at it. Those, however, who don't, and we think Ward 8 certainly would vote that way, we possibly think Ward 7 would vote that way, maybe a couple of others, Ward 5 would certainly be on the fence, would be a very close one. Then those communities would get their own community-controlled force. And that means the DC police would then redraw its boundaries. And those redrawn boundaries would then exclude the wards which voted for their own community forces, and those community forces would then get their own departments. Those departments would then be run by would fully be run by a group of civilians The Black Panther Party called for those civilians to be voted into office. We proposed something slightly different. We proposed the democratic method of sortition. Sortition is random selection to run government. And this has been tried in several places historically. There's also been a study that was jointly done by Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and a couple other places that argue that given the current state of the United States Congress, the United States Congress will run more effectively if, they literally said this in a paper, if you would take the white pages, you know, this is what you're dating myself. The white pages are old, you know, encyclopedia. We have names and phone numbers for everyone who is in it. Put the white pages, put them up on a board, and then you blindfold someone and give them a dart, and get them to throw darts, and whichever name the dart lands on gets to be your congressperson in that area. And they argued this would be this was a study done and argued this would be a more effective and more representative manner. So we would argue that we would want sortition as a way of choosing who runs the police department. Sortition will be important because right now when elections happen, there's a few things that go on. First of all, people who run for election have to get money, and they would that means gives corporations a chance to buy out those who are running for office. And that means your next police board will be brought to you by Walmart or brought to you by whatever, Amazon or whatever big corporation. The other thing is that people who get elected are more likely to be white or light-skinned, if they're gonna be black, better educated. Not that there's anything wrong with being well-educated, but it means that those who are most impacted by police brutality, who are less educated, or underemployed, have a worse chance of getting their hands on the actual levels of power. This would eliminate that. There'll be no election in that sense, so there'll be no one to bribe, and the person who's standing on the corner would have just as great a chance of getting on that board as the person with all kinds of strong political connections. And then this sortition selected board, randomly selected board, basically names picked out of a hat of everyone who lives in a district, would then get on the board and they would be able to determine the policies, the procedures, and they would even be able to hire and fire individual police officers. We think we could win this. We think we could win this soon. We think we could win this across multiple cities. And this would create then an area, this would not be a total seizure of power, to be clear, but this would create an area where people would say, we have won power in this area of our lives. We now want to win power in more areas of our lives. If we have community control over police, we would not be protesting. We'd not be spending months living in the woods to prevent the police from tearing the woods down in order to build a cop city. And we would not have one of our own murdered in their attempt to save us from cop city. We would, in the same way that the agenda for this meeting, because we have power over this meeting, the agenda for this meeting was made by a group of comrades sitting and calmly and rationally making decisions. We'd have a group of comrades sitting around calmly, rationally making decisions about what the police would spend their money on, and it would not be tearing down a forest to build a cop city. We think that then by having control over the police, rather than trying to constantly influence them, then we would be able to exercise self-determination even in a limited way in our communities, and our communities would end up being better for it. And it would mean that people would very quickly see that if we can have control over this area of our lives, we can have control over other areas of our lives. We need to build a campaign today for community control of the police. That is the call for our time. That's what we should be fighting for, starting with police, and then we expand that to be community control over schools, community control over resources, community control over land and housing, and ultimately community control over all land and all people. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Does anybody have any questions to follow up with this presentation? We got one question right here. Hold on for the microphone.
Who had the question?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So first off, peace. So my question really was, what do we do about the thought? I think the idea is a great idea in practice, but I'm not hearing about what are we going to do with the thought that produces things like patriarchy, transphobia, capitalism, imperialism, like there's like an intellectual tradition that comes out of Europe. You mentioned Greece and Rome. That comes out of Greece and Rome. That really produced these norms that the society has really governed itself by. So what are we gonna do about the thought that's gonna continue to exist after we get like community control of these?
So one thing that PACA talks about a lot is that we are a all-African organization. But one of the things that we think about ourselves and that the way we approach things, for example, we don't think that one of our missions is to fight against racism. So if you think about the traditional definition of racism that's used, is racism equals prejudice plus power. So prejudice plus power equals racism, right? So if we're fighting racism, that means we're fighting prejudice and power together. Prejudice then is a series of opinions, is a series of thoughts, right? It's an idea that one group of people or one person has against or about another group of people. Kwame Ture, when he was still Stokely Carmichael, famously said, Kwame Ture, when he was still known as Stokely Carmichael, famously said, if a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If a white man has the power to lynch me, that's my problem. We are not in the business and cannot be in the business of brain wrestling with people, changing their minds about whether or not the economic system that is destroying the entire planet is a good one or a bad one. We just don't have time for that. In the same way that on the side of prejudice, we don't have time to brain wrestle with white people to try to fix them and figure things out, right? And I'm not saying that they shouldn't make an effort, they should, and that someone should do. That's just not what we're doing. So there does need to be those discussions and those debates, but what we really need in both instances is power. And if we have power, then we can make sure that it's illegal to destroy the planet. And then even if you think capitalism is the best economic system, that's great for you. You could write a book about it, you could talk about it, you can start a discussion group. But what you can't do is you can't implement capitalism. What you can't do is you can't steal someone's labor and become wealthy from it. And what you can't do is employ the means of capitalism as a way of enriching yourself or enriching your class. We need to have power so that we can prevent capitalism from happening, not debate so that we can try to convince people who have power to change their behavior.
Thank you. We have one more question.
I apologize, I walked in a little late. I just wanted to know, could you clarify the role that you saw elected officials playing in community control over the police?
Elected officials playing?
Yeah.
I assume they will be a worthy adversary, and we would continuously have to combat their affronts.
All right, thank you. That's all for Max right now. We really appreciate everybody coming in. We're gonna have some food. We have food at this table back here, so if you're hungry and you don't have you're short of cash, go ahead and grab you half a sandwich. Yeah, and please support the cafe. We're gonna move on to the next presentation by the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, DC. So please welcome Angel.
Hello everyone, my name is Angel. I use they, them pronouns. And this is my comrade, Jomo.
Jomo, he, him pronouns.
And we are with the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, DC chapter.
Just pull it up.
And we have a presentation for you today. I'm going to hand it over to Jomo to introduce us and explain who we are and the work that we do.
All right. So, good afternoon, everyone. In our movement, the New African Independence Movement, we have a call and response that we greet people with, and that is free to land, free to land, free to land, by any means necessary. So, next slide. So the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement is an organization of New Africans here inside the United States, or the belly of the beast, the empire, whose mission it is to defend the human rights of our people and promote self-determination. Our organization is built off kind of three broad principles of self-determination, self-defense, and self-respect. That we understand very much like our PACA comrades that white supremacy, patriarchy, capitalism have been at the root of our people's oppression, and that we understand that without community control, without the power to determine our destiny, our lives, we will continue to fall victim to genocide. So we agree that it's a question of power for us, and that we seek to raise consciousness about self-determination and about national independence as a human right. And so that's where we would pick up the other side of the story of PACA, that we would say that not only is it important to win community control, but we need to win control of our territory, the ground underneath our feet, and that building a nation is a part of an answer, an anti-imperialist answer to a socialist solution to our problems, and that we intend to build a nation to break the back of the empire so that they could never do to us what they continue to do along the world. Next slide. So our organization is based off of 6 principles. We call for defending the human rights of all African people. We demand reparations. We promote self-determination. We oppose genocide, the acceptable or calculated killing of our people in any portion or any kind of way. We demand the release of all political prisoners, and we most recently won the release of Dr. Mutulu Shakur, so get that up for us. And there's more work to be done. There's a call out around political prisoner Ed Poindexter, who recently lost his leg in the Nebraska medical facility for lack of medical neglect. And there's a current call to get him his proper medical care and call for his release. And then the last one is our 6th principle, is that we struggle to end sexist oppression. And we most recently at our national convening have expanded that definition to include all oppressed genders and sexualities. Next slide. And so this is our political lineage. We draw our political organizing, our understanding, our ideology from Queen Mother Audrey Moore, who gave us the name New African, who was also a leader in the reparations movement. We all know about Malcolm. And then the third one is Robert and Mabel Williams, right? And it was their work in Monroe, North Carolina, their work as the liberators, the self-defense that we draw our lineage and lineage from. Next slide. And then this is what we're up to. So we have a national program that we try to execute locally in our community. Here in DC, we are moving towards building out a cop watch, because we believe part of self-determination, part of community control is being able to secure ourselves from state violence without the use of the state. And so we'll be having a training this coming Tuesday that we can share more information about, as well as beginning to build out cop watch patrols in our communities. The next one is the work that we've done around freeing political prisoners, particularly Dr. Mutulu Shakur, also trying to free Kamal Siddiqui. Y'all know who Kamal Siddiqui is? A little bit, some. All right. So if you've read the autobiography of Assata Shakur, Kamal Siddiqui is the father of Assata's daughter. And so he has been in jail for 20 years for his refusal to participate in a plot to try to bring her back. And so we're in a campaign to try to free him and to bring him home. As we talked about, our self-defense with Let Your Motto Be Resistance, and I work around Cop Watch. And then we do work around training and development. We have copies of a latest BAM newspaper that we can pass out for folks. We also do stuff around the New African Scouts. We do a camp every year called Camp Punzinko, where we bring folks, young people all across the nation to come together to be in community and learn skills. And then our last work is around cooperative aid and mutual aid and cooperative economics. And then we do a lot of work around international solidarity. Slide. Is this me too? All right, so that's me and the organization. I'll pass it over to Angel to take us into the rest of our presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you, comrade. Really appreciate that introduction. So today we'll be talking about the importance of the struggle to free political prisoners and how it connects to the forest defenders in Atlanta who are currently being detained and charged with felonious counts of domestic terrorism because of their work to stop Cop City. So the militarization of the South is a direct threat to New Africans, particularly those in the Black Belt South. Other captured nations inside the U.S., Africa, and the global South. We call on the New African nation to fight for self-determination, human rights, reparations, and the end to the perpetual war to dominate and pacify our communities here and abroad. Free the land, free the land, free the land.
Free the land.
Thank you. So, as Jomo mentioned, a lot of our work has to do with freeing political prisoners. A lot of the political prisoners, well, actually, does anyone know the term of a political prisoner? Okay, all right, got some folks. Cool. We also have prisoners of war, people who were captured because of Dr. Mutulu Shakur would be considered a prisoner of war because of the work that he did against the state to bring us our liberation. He did not feel as though he was an organizer, but instead he was a soldier fighting on behalf of Black and New African people in this country for our liberation. So therefore, he will be considered a prisoner of war. A political prisoner is someone who is captured because of their political beliefs and the work that they do outside of their outside to bring awareness to their political beliefs in other people. Politicized prisoners are prisoners who would be George Jackson. When he was arrested, he was not involved in any political work. It wasn't until he went inside that he began to become politicized and develop a political consciousness. And he was killed because of his political consciousness and the work that he was doing inside. So he will be considered a politicized prisoner. We work with all, specifically from the Black Liberation Movement of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. These folks were pretty much captured because of the work that they were doing. You know, they were doing free breakfast programs. All the Black Panthers were doing that, and the state didn't like it. We know that food is fuel. It fuels our bodies. You know, in order for us to go to school and pay attention to what's going on, we have to have food because it turns into energy when we eat it. In order for us not to have access to good food, we won't perform well in school, which can also determine like our material conditions and what we have access to, as well as the Black Panther Party came up with sickle cell anemia testing, which it affects Black people for the most part. So whenever a Black person gives birth, their child is tested for sickle cell anemia so they can have the proper access because it is a autoimmune disease. So we feel as though by these Black Panthers, not even just Black Panthers or Black Liberation Army fighters or like RAM movement folks, which is the Revolutionary Action Movement, these folks being arrested and captured, we don't have contact with them sometimes because they're no longer in our community. So with that being said, if we don't have these people telling us like, hey, this is what the state is doing, they're poisoning your food, or like, hey, maybe you shouldn't be hanging on that street corner because it's considered loitering and the cops will lock you up. We don't have those folks to tell us, you know, what to look out for, what to beware of, or to pretty much combat what we're seeing on television or what we're learning in school. So from them not being in our communities, it gives the state a chance to force us into assimilation and conformity and make us believe that we cannot fight for our liberation, that we have to wait for some great messiah to come along and free us all. When in reality, we know that once we have our power, once we have our autonomy and our determination, we can fight for our liberation and get alongside other people in our community to also fight for our liberation. The next one I would like to talk about is the response of the state repression to the 2020 George Floyd uprisings. So I know that I mentioned that MXGM does a lot of work freeing political prisoners and prisoners of war from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But what most people don't understand is we also have political prisoners from the present time, from the 2000s. One would be Joshua Williams from the Black Lives Matter movement. Another person would be considered Ashley Diamond. She was a Black trans woman in Atlanta who became a politicized prisoner. We have political prisoners right now. We have people who are becoming politicized prisoners. We have prisoners of war right now in our generation who we need to be fighting for. We don't hear about these people if we're not involved in the movement. And that's the problem. We want to change that. And we want people to understand that what we're seeing happen with these forest defenders in Stop Cop City, it's not new. You know, the state, they play by the same rule book. They may change it up a little bit, but for the most part, that's what they do. And they're using that as a tactic to repress other people from getting involved in that movement, in the other liberation movement. You know, nobody wants to go to jail. Nobody wants to be charged with felonious charges. You know, even if you just get locked up and you're taken into booking, that could affect your job, that could affect your health. Like, it can affect so much in your life, even if you're found not guilty. Your whole life is changed because of that. So what we're trying to do is we want people to understand that in order for us to get our liberation, we have to build a movement, a very strong movement around freeing our political prisoners, around freeing those on the inside, because it could easily be one of us or one of our comrades or one of our loved ones. And I believe that we should stay ready so that we don't have to get ready. So as we're all here now, I think it'll be a great time for all of us to figure out in what capacity do we have in which we can get involved in this movement. I'm not saying you have to be on the front lines in the streets, but there are other ways, such as letter writing, such as looking up these people and their stories, and getting involved in like the Jericho movement, getting involved with MXGM, or other organizations or collectives out here who are doing the work to bring our political prisoners home. And also, you know, bring home the forced offenders. We're fighting for them to come home as well, because they have families, they have loved ones. You know, yesterday was Earth Day, and they were literally just defending the earth, you know, and it's not going to stop in Atlanta. We see they're preparing to build cop cities all throughout the country. Most folks don't know, but the Maryland and Virginia governors are both like having a basketball game to see who gets the new FBI headquarters location. And Maryland, it's a huge state, but they want to put it in the blackest county, which is Prince George's County. That's going to be terrible if we have the FBI headquarters there. And PG County already has 9 different police departments, including the Prince George's County Police Department. So that's just more policing in black communities, meaning we're going to be terrorized even more. So it is really important that we get involved in this fight and show our solidarity to stop Cop City and to bring these forest defenders home, as well as bringing home our political prisoners and our politicized prisoners and our prisoners of war, and let them know that they're not alone and we didn't forget about them, and that we love them and we're appreciative of all the sacrifices that they made for us. Oh, and can we go to the last slide really quickly? I just want to show the call for Ed Poindexter. Okay. And this is their call to action for Ed Poindexter. This is just information about him and how we're demanding compassionate release for him. If you follow your Instagram, MXGMDC, there's more information on how you can write letters or call the warden and the parole board, but like call the warden and the Nebraska Department of Corrections that he's being held at. And thank you.
Thank you. Do we have 1 or 2 quick questions and 2 quick responses? Who's the other person? Okay, 1 question.
How do you plan to put pressure on the state for issues such as a political prisoner who like severely needs medical attention?
So one way we can put pressure on the state is phone zapping. That is something that the Ed Poindexter campaign is calling for folks to do. You can find the phone number, once again, on our Instagram, and just call them, put pressure on them. In my experience, I have gotten people who answer the phone, and you just recite the blurb that we wrote on the graphic, and they're like, okay, we'll take it down, thank you. And then you pass it on to someone else, like, hey, call this number, you know. Other things, what folks did for the Free Matulu Now campaign, which reached out to Congress, pretty much exhausting all means by any means necessary, pretty much. And it worked. You know, we brought Matulu home by doing that. I know some people don't want to work with the state. I totally understand that. But there are some ways in which we can put pressure on the state to bring home these prisoners because, you know, like I said, it worked with Dr. Matula, it worked with Sundiata Acoli, it worked with Sekou Odinka, and so many others before them. So we just have to keep up with that, keep that tradition, learn from our elders, talk to folks who were already involved in these campaigns, and figure out how to work with them and how to put pressure like on the state. Because unfortunately, we're not going to see the story on CNN, not going to see it on Fox 5. So it's just, like I said, in our best interest to get involved with these people who are already doing the work and ask them.
Please clap it up for MXGM.
Can they give us their Instagram? People in the chat want to know how they can find more information directly, so I'm going to type it in.
Yes, our Instagram is MXGDC.
People love that presentation. They're calling Cool. All right, so just a reminder, Dante, could you raise your hand, please? Where Dante is raising his hand, we have food that was purchased from the cafe. So if you're hungry, go ahead and get you a wrap. They're good. Exactly, and we have a delivery service. Feel free to support the cafe for a smoothie. They're really great. Thank you again, Sankofa. And we have the Claudia Jones School for Political Education coming up. Elizabeth will be presenting on their behalf.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth. My pronouns are she, her. Thank you for having us today. Can we go to the next slide, please? Away from the speaker. Okay. I just don't want to stand in the middle of the room. Okay, so I wanted to give some background on what's happening here in DC with political repression. And this first slide just basically talks about how, in many ways, DC already is a cop city. Obviously, it's not the cop city that the government in Atlanta is trying to build, and we definitely don't want that here. But, you know, we are already extremely heavily invested in policing. So just a number of statistics that I wanted to share with you. As many of you know, DC is already currently spending more than $500 million every year on the Metropolitan Police Department, which is one police department here in DC, but there are dozens. So that's more than $500 million every year. Some recent news that we've heard is that there are now new 20,000 hiring bonuses for new officers, 5,000 cadet bonuses for new cadets per person, a total of $500,000 in rental assistance to help officers in MPD if they want to move into DC from outside, and a total of $1.2 million in student loan repayment assistance. So some of you are clutching your chests because this is ridiculous. You know, and this is just a small sample of the type of financial resources and incentives and benefits that cops get to surveil and control and kill DC community members. We also did an analysis of the budget in the proposed fiscal year 2024 budget, or you can do a similar analysis of what was in the actual 2023 budget, similar results. But the DC government allocated more in local funding to MPD's operating budget than, get ready, the local funds allocated to the operating budgets for Department of Parks and Rec, the DC Public Libraries, Department of Transportation, Department of Energy and Environment, Department of Employment Services, Teachers Retirement System, Unemployment Compensation Fund, the Office of the Tenants Advocate, Office of the People's Counsel, and the Office of Human Rights combined. And in fact, if you look at the numbers for it, there's still like several tens of $1 million remaining that I just, I couldn't find other offices to add to this list. But it is astounding what this government is prioritizing. And DC already has the most police per capita of any other major city in the United States. If you look at some very, very small localities, you'll see that they actually have a higher per capita because these are very small, a couple thousand people. We are larger than that. But if you look at major cities, we are absolutely by far the locality with the most per capita. Am I doing something wrong with the mic? It kind of goes in and out.
A little away from the speaker.
Okay, so I need to be away from both sides, but I also don't want to block the screen. But again, the reason why I say that DC is already in many ways a cop city is that we are actually, the government is neglecting the actual community in favor of prioritizing cop funding. So in 2019, DC was actually ranked the most intensely gentrified city in the entire country. And as of the last count, we have more than 4,000 unhoused neighbors here in the district. 85% of wards 7 and 8, which are majority Black wards, 85% of residents in these two wards live more than 1 mile from a actual real grocery store, so a full service grocery store. To give a little bit of context on that, there are about 4 grocery stores that are full service in wards 7 and 8. I think the newest one, there used to be 3, I think the newest one opened in the last couple of months. In contrast, the other 6 wards have 72 full service grocery stores. So there's just an absolute lack of priority for food, which is so important. As other speakers mentioned earlier, we need to have nutritious food in our bodies in order to live. Rent increases have been going up as much as 50% in a single year. These rent hikes over the last couple of years have been astronomical. They've been paired with, price increases across the board for all types of costs of living, and oftentimes it's billed as inflation, but we know that it's actually price gouging, right? We know that these corporations are colluding with each other to increase prices more and more. At the same time, while they're colluding to set prices for labor as low as possible, right? In our schools, we have more cops than guidance counselors. We have more security guards than psychologists and nurses. There's just, again, an absolute lack of priority for resources that nurture our community, instead focusing on cops and cop-adjacent officers. And we know that violence interruption works, right? Violence interruption programs are where you have people from the local community, some of whom may be formerly incarcerated, who've been involved in violence, talking to the people that they know with credibility in their neighborhoods to say, hey, there's a different way to resolve this conflict. Studies have shown that violence interruption is up to 5 times more effective than policing. Yet the numbers show that they're absolutely underfunded year after year. There are a lot of things I could tell you about how DC is allocating funds toward violence interruption, but I think the one that really stands out is Ward 8 currently has 0 full-time violence interrupters. So what's going on? Neglecting the community leads to violence. It is absolutely not a coincidence that 40% of all of the gun violence in the district takes place in 1 square mile. It happens to be in Ward 7, which is geographically 2% of the city in terms of square mileage. It's in Southeast. We know that Ward 7 is one of the most neglected wards in the district. Every map of DC looks the same, right? You look at unemployment, you look at food deserts, you look at COVID vaccination rates. You look at really anything, and of course, if you look at distribution of policing, all of these maps have the same gradients, right? And as you know, Ward 7 is one of the most over-policed and neglected places in the city. Meanwhile, if you compare the rates of gun violence between Southeast versus Northwest, you'll see they're actually 10 times higher in the Southeast than in the Northwest part of DC. And so it really shows that having more police in an area doesn't actually mean that there's going to be less violence. You all already know this. Police don't actually create safety, but it's just important to remind ourselves that the numbers really bear this out too. Okay, so political repression. Cops are especially violent when we protest their violence. We tell them they're violent, they're like, no, we're not, and then they are more violent. I don't necessarily want to go through all of, well, maybe I will, I don't know. This is a very, very non-exhaustive list of people who've been killed by police in DC over the last couple of years. Every single person on this list is a Black man, or in some cases, a Black boy, or a very young Black person. Cops are definitely part of the problem of violence in DC, and oftentimes when people talk about violence, they don't think about cops. This crowd obviously is different, but the general narrative in the country when we talk about gun violence or violence is we think about we don't remember that cops, when they use guns to kill people, they're part of the problem of gun violence. And in fact, 1 in 3 people killed in the US by a stranger are killed by a cop. So they're absolutely part of the problem. Here, we have a lot of community members that I know you're familiar with, you may have known, you may know their families. But we have Daquan Young, who was only 24 years old in 2018. He was killed by an off-duty MPD cop. The cop shot him 5 times, including 3 times in the back. Marquise Alston was 22 years old in 2018. He was chased into an alley by 2 MPD cops. He was shot more than 6 times. Jeffrey Price, 22 years old in 2018. He and Karan Hilton Brown, who was 20 years old in 2020, suffered very similar fates. They were both chased by MPD when they were riding their dirt bikes until they crashed and they died. So this isn't an example of gun violence, but it's an example of cop violence. In Jeffrey's case, they said that he was going too fast. So the way to cure the going too fast and the dangerousness of that was to chase him to make him go faster. And then in Karan's case, they claimed he wasn't wearing a helmet, so the solution to that was to kill him. Antoine Gilmore was 27 years old in 2021. He fell asleep in his car at an intersection at 2:45 in the morning. They woke him up, found him, and killed him. And the excuse for that was that he was blocking traffic, which we know is absolute bullshit. It was 3 in the morning. George Watson was 34 years old in 2021. He was killed by MPD for holding a toy gun. It's kind of silly to even say it was a toy gun because even if he had a real gun, it doesn't necessitate killing him. DeAndre Johnson was 30 years old in 2021. He was actually killed by the same MPD officer who killed Eric Carter back in 2019. He was a 53-year-old black man. These cops who do killing, who do violence, continue to get promoted if they don't get to keep their jobs, they're actually getting promoted for it because they're actually doing their job really well by killing. Kevin Hargrave Short was 31 years old last year. He was shot in the back of the head and killed by an MPD cop. David Lazarus Wilson was 27 years old last year. He was killed by an off-duty MPD commander, Jason Bagshaw. Many of you may know him. He's quite infamous. He was actually promoted recently. He's known for a very violent history, and he in the last year or so was actually promoted to commander, despite repeated community protests against his particular violence. Delanio Martin was 17 years old this year. This is just one example of the fact that many of Black folks that are here in DC are actually killed by not MPD officers, but other types of DC police. So in this case, Delanio was killed by US Park Police in a very similar situation to Antoine Gilmore. He was found sleeping in a car. They alleged that it was stolen, and then he ended up being killed. Again, this just shows the function of policing in our country, which is to protect property over human lives. There's never any reason for killing anyone for stealing anything. And then I wanted to do a really quick summary of what happened with cop violence in 2020. I know a lot of you were there for this. You have a much broader and richer memory of the history of that, but just to give you some really, quick highlights. As folks remember, when the uprisings happened in 2020 in response to the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and many others, the cops used pepper spray and tear gas, which, by the way, are banned by the Chemical Weapons Convention. It's a convention that's been signed by almost 200 countries across the world. They are banned in use of warfare, but the loophole is that they're not banned outside of warfare, and so cops use it against civilians. They also use batons, shields. Cops use their bikes. I was actually legal observing during one of these protests, and a cop was really angry at the protesters. He picked up his bike and started hitting people with his bike, and I also got hit by his bike. And many other things. They use whatever they can as weapons. Folks remember the Swan Street incident? There was a protest where the cops kettled, meaning they corralled people into an area where they couldn't escape in the street, and they ended up arresting and tear gassing 194 protesters at night. Dozens of these protesters fled into a resident's home, folks will remember this, in order to escape the tear gas. The cops then started spraying tear gas into the home of that resident. Many people actually stayed overnight there while the cops camped out outside, surveilling them, waiting for them to come out. Recently, actually, MPD Internal Affairs investigation found that there was no excessive force used that night, which is ridiculous. There is a civil lawsuit pending. 7 of the protesters from that night actually filed a lawsuit against the DC government, and the lawsuit is now pending with the DC Circuit, which is a federal appellate court that oversees DC. And then here, this is my final slide, but I wanted to give a brief history of political repression by DC cops. The information on this page was actually gathered from 2 sources. One is that hackers were able to hack into a lot of these confidential documents and they released them. And then the other is that there were a lot of FOIA responses, Freedom of Information Act, Freedom of Information Act requests that were filed, and these are the responses to those requests. But it just really reveals a pattern of abuse. So one is that there is a pattern of keeping abusers on the force, and like I said earlier, promoting them to higher positions. So a couple years ago, internal MPD investigators found that 64 cops who are currently on the force right now had committed criminal misconduct during the years from 2009 to 2019. MPD tried to terminate 24 of the 64 current cops, which is just, something to think about, that they didn't even think about firing 40 of them. They only targeted 24. And then the Adverse Action Board was a 3-person panel that was able to intervene in that. And that panel was at the time led by Robert Contee, who is now our chief of police. And he intervened and blocked 21 of the 24 people who were up for being fired from being fired. And so in the end, only 3 of the 64 cops who were found by MPD of committing criminal misconduct were actually terminated. And I didn't want to on the slide. The slide is already pretty heavy, but I wanted to share an example of some of the things that these cops did who are still on the force today. So one of them, his wife reported that he was repeatedly abusing her, and she testified that he was going to try to kill her if he was disciplined by MPD in any way. He was suspended for 10 days. There was another officer who confessed to soliciting a sex worker. When she said no to him, he pointed his MPD-issued gun at her, and then he also fabricated a false report against her where he lied and said that she had stolen his phone. He later confessed that all of this was made up, and he was suspended for 45 days. Another officer was reported for running over the mother of his child with his SUV in 2009. She survived, just wanted to let you know that, but he ran her over with his car, and he was suspended for 21 days. And another example, this is just 4 examples I'm sharing with you of the 64 people, but another example is an officer in MPD who confessed that he punched his wife so hard in the face, in the skull, that he fractured a bone around her eye socket. He was suspended for 40 days. So, the fact that MPD officers and leadership worked really, really hard to keep these people on the force, that our current chief of police did that. People know he did that, and this was actually probably part of the why he was promoted to become the chief of police, because he is invested in protecting abusers. Okay, the next bullet talks about a pattern of MPD surveilling Black and anti-racist organizations and advocates. So there were a number of internal MPD emails I'll try to stand here, that were sent between 2011 and 2017 that hackers got, and they revealed that the intelligence branch, is a branch of MPD, have been overwhelmingly targeting Black Lives Matter activists and other just Black and anti-racist organizations to surveil them. And so the emails would mention different search terms that they were using to surveil different organizations. And the search terms were overwhelmingly targeting the phrase Black Lives Matter, the word BLM, and the word Antifa. So that came up 104 times in the searches. Meanwhile, they were only looking at the word Nazi and the word alt-right 9 times in total combined. And 3 of those instances were actually concerns about an Antifa person punching a Nazi. So we shouldn't even count those. So really, it should be only 6 times if they were actually looking into Nazis and fascists. So it really comes as no surprise that in February of last year, one of the MPD officers in the intelligence branch, Shane Lamond, was put on leave because he was found to have been sharing the location of anti-fascist activists and anti-racist activists with the former head of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio. He was texting him and letting him know where different protesters were going to be so that the Proud Boys could go find them in those locations. Okay, third bullet here is about the history of MPD surveilling Black and Latinx children. So as some of you may know, MPD has a gang database. It has actually expanded over the last couple of years to include 4,000 residents, with Black and Latinx residents making up, so not everybody in the database has a race, but of the people that have a race associated with their entry in the database, 88% of them are Black and 12% of them are Latinx. And as you can do the math, 88 plus 12 adds up to 100. So 100% of the people that have a race in the database are Black or Latinx. And then again, not everybody has an age in the database, but of the people who have an age in the database, nearly 20% of them, I believe it's like 19 point something percent, so 1 in 5 are minors. And in fact, they are minors when they were added. So they were added when they were children, and actually some of them were as young as 10 years old when they were added. So these are literal children who are being labeled as gang members and what they call gang associates. And I want to just share a little bit of information about what gang associate means according to MPD. So MPD officers can add anyone as a gang associate or a gang, so a gang associate is someone who, if they have a reasonable suspicion, which is a very, very low level of standard of proof, that the person fulfills one of these very nebulous criteria. One is that they are, quote, associating with gang members. Another is that they've been arrested in a gang area for an offense that is part of the gang's criminal enterprise. So they're just there in the area when they got arrested. Or they've been named by a gang member as a, quote, reliable informant. So these are very nebulous criteria. You can easily be labeled a gang associate in this gang database without ever even being involved in any of these activities. The next one is about rage-induced policing. So the Robbery Intervention Program, RIP, was a program that operated by MPD in 2012 and 2013. And the official purpose of the program was to reduce robberies, as the name would suggest, Robbery Intervention Program. What the officers actually did is they spent 75% of their time in Wards 7 and 8, which again, they were just targeting Black people. And they were harassing and arresting people for really nonsensical violations. So to give an example of that, they harassed and arrested Black residents for things like, quote, aimlessly standing near a metro station, quote, pausing in dark areas while walking, things like that. So really things that any of us could be doing at any time. And they were doing this as part of this specialized unit, the Robbery Intervention Program. And what's interesting is the officers called themselves the Rage-Induced Policing Unit. So they knew they were being violent, they thought it was funny, and that's what they refer to themselves as. Luckily, this program no longer exists, but again, it is part of the history of MPD's violence and official policy of violence for DC community members. The last example is that MPD keeps a watch list of its critics. So recent court documents have revealed that MPD had this unofficial policy of doing two things. When they got FOIA requests, which are Freedom of Information Act requests, they would do one of two things. One is if somebody was on a watch list, they would either refuse to give information to them altogether, or they would actively delay giving them information. So if there was an activist that they had a grudge against, if there was a journalist who was doing reporting against them in ways that they didn't like, these people were all on the watch list. And they either would never get the information or it would take them a really, really long time to get that information. Obviously, that is a violation of our First Amendment rights. So, with that, I will just end this slide of different examples of political repression here in DC.
Thank you. So I really appreciate that presentation, talking about the conditions that we're experiencing here in Washington, D.C., as well as setting the stage to talk about police repression. So we have the Freedom Road Socialist. we have the Freedom Road Socialist Organization about to come up and talk about the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression and the history for that organization. Please clap for them.
What's up, y'all? My name is KB. I go by they, them pronouns. It's my comrade, John. John, what are your pronouns? Him. All right, cool. So we are members of Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and today we're going to be presenting on the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which is a mass group that grows out of the struggle against racist police violence and terror. So, like I said, we're the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. We have a DC branch that's called the DC Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. You know, our elders in the movement really appreciated having, you know, very long acronym names. So I appreciate them too. But so the NARPR grows out of the struggle to free Angela Davis from prison. You know, back in the 60s and 70s, there was this little known FBI, repression program called COINTELPRO, which targeted Black and Brown and also revolutionary organizers. So one of the main methods that COINTELPRO and the FBI used to, repress, political speech was to, charge people with bogus charges or sometimes, actual charges, but to increase the penalties on people, putting people in jail and stuff like that. So in the early 70s, Angela Davis got hooked up with one of our comrades mentioned the Soledad brothers, which were three Black men who were in a prison. Can't remember the exact city that the prison was in right now, but they were in prison. George Jackson was one of them. They were radicalized by reading, Marxists, Maoists, and other revolutionary thinkers and things of that nature. Angela Davis began to have a friendship with George Jackson, and George Jackson's little brother, Jonathan Jackson, was also radicalized by his brother being in prison and decided to, try to hold up a courtroom with a shotgun and to get his brother and other Soledad brothers free. So that did not end well. That ended in the death of Jonathan Jackson and the death of the judge and numerous other casualties that day. But the way Angela Davis was implicated in this was the guns that Jonathan Jackson used. She had some affiliations with him. I'm not too sure, but essentially the state came after Angela Davis, who was a very known speaker, a very well-known speaker in the Black Revolutionary movement, and she was targeted during this time period, and she was arrested for murder, conspiracy, and kidnapping, even though she had nothing to do with the incident that happened at this courthouse. And so Angela Davis was then in prison for over 18 months, and she was only freed 6 days before her actual trial due to a mass movement that grew around her called the Free Angela Davis movement, which was to free Angela Davis, who was a political prisoner, and other political prisoners at the time. So Angela Davis was eventually acquitted of the charges, and she was set free. And so after her acquittal, Angela Davis and another revolutionary, very well-known communist at the time, Charlene Mitchell, started this organization called NARPR. And so NARPR is a mass defense organization that is committed to it's a two-pronged approach, not only protecting activists from political repression from the state, but also fighting the state in the form of fighting against police crimes and police terror and putting pressure on the state in that way. So a few years ago in 2019, NARPR had this fallow period, like a lot of organizations after, honestly, the fall of the Soviet Union in '91. You know, activists in Chicago and in DC and in other cities from around the country came back together to refound NARPR. So we have been reborn anew in the last few years, and we are here to you know, go back to our roots in a lot of ways in terms of doing that, defense work, but also to push the struggle against police violence and repression forward. So I'm gonna let my comrade John come up. He's gonna talk to y'all about Black Reconstruction.
Thanks, KB. I hope you all don't mind if I just sit down and talk about this, but I want to get into a little bit about the history of community control of the police. A lot of this it's summarized from Frank Chapman, who is the executive director of the National Alliance. His book, Marxist-Leninist Perspectives on Black Liberation and Socialism. Highly recommend anyone check it out. It's incredible. It's really good. But let's get started. Community control of the police, it links back all the way to Black Reconstruction, immediately following the end of the Civil War. Prior to the start of the Civil War, both houses of Congress were controlled by the Slaveholders Party, the Democratic Party at the time. The president and his cabinet were in full sympathy of the South. 7 out of 9 Supreme Court justices were either slaveholders or vigorous sympathizers, and all the committees of Congress were controlled by slaveholders. Through the Fugitive Slave Act and the infamous Dred Scott Supreme Court decision, which ruled that people of African descent are, quote, not included and were not intended to be included under the word citizens in the Constitution, and can therefore claim none of the rights and privileges which that instrument provides for and secures to citizens of the United States. Slaveholders were trying their best to expand slavery and turn the U.S. into a republic dominated by slaveholders. However, also at this time, the slave uprisings led by folks like Denmark Vesey, Nat Turner, Shields Green, and John Brown, prior to the Civil War, transformed into a slave revolution. 200,000 former slaves were recruited into the Union Army. Yesterday's slaves were now landless peasants, armed with guns, occupying the master's big house, tearing down the master's churches, etc. The political character of the revolution consisted of granting universal suffrage to freed Black men. At this time, Union troops, particularly Black regiments and the Union Leagues, a mainly Black political organization, emerged as key forces backing Reconstruction, and they remained poised to quash counter-revolution from the Southern Burman Democrats and the KKK. For almost a decade, Black people as a people had democratic community control in the Black Belt, that is Black majority counties, over how the law was enforced and who enforced it. This can be seen as one of the earliest forms of community control and was arguably the beginning of Black Reconstruction. Now, following this, the Enforcement Act of 1871, otherwise known as the Klan Act, made the KKK and other similar groups illegal. Klansmen were prosecuted in federal court, where juries were predominantly Black. The executive action taken by President Grant's federal troops, which significantly included Black troops, quashed the Klan, thus preventing it from violently denying the former slaves' right to vote. Once they were able to vote, Black people proceeded to elect their own marshals, sheriffs, jurors. Black people policed, served, and protected themselves from the racist, organized terrorism of the Klan. However, in 1877, federal troops were ordered out of the South by President Rutherford B. Hayes as a capitulation to the slave-owning Bourbon Democrats. Black regiments and the Union Leagues were disbanded, leaving Black people defenseless. Counter-revolution ensued, and by 1905, most Black people were effectively disenfranchised in every single Southern state. As they lost community control, the Klan and its sympathizers in the Bourbon Democrats regained power in the South. Under a policy approved by President Lincoln, the property confiscated during the war was returned to the heirs of the Confederate owners. The Confederate rebels were traitors who were given by the government every opportunity to regroup and unleash a reign of terror on Black people. The rich, white planters, though a minority, were able to win over to their ideals the vast majority of poor whites by promising their problems will be addressed through white unity against African Americans. This kind of clearly stated and organized racist politics set the stage for the enactment of black codes, a predecessor to Jim Crow, for legalizing racism and pushing black workers to the bottom and making them super exploited workers. Not only were they denied the right to vote, they were forced back into the cotton fields under slave-like conditions. You know, W.E.B. Du Bois at this time, he said, "The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back again towards slavery," after they lost, their form of community control at the time. In the next slide, we can get into what a couple of our comrades were talking about. The Black Panther Party then revived the movement and demand for community control of police in the 60s. In 1973, at the Chicago Community Control of Police Conference, Bobby Seale stated, quote, "The police's real power is manifested in the organized guns and force. But we're saying that the people in this community, the people in this country, don't have any control over that organized guns, force, and power. We're saying that the capitalist, the racist, and others have control over it. And we're saying that we want to change it, that we want to revolutionize it, and turn it over into the hands of the people for a new process to occur. We're saying we want community control." And we can go on to the next slide. We're going to talk about some of the things that are happening currently right now. KB and I, we have the chance to go to Chicago and work with the Chicago Alliance. They're about 10 steps ahead of us here in DC. They've been working this movement for about 10 years. And just in March 2012, Rekia Boyd, along with a bunch of other unfortunate murders like Laquan McDonald, this spurred on the demand for community control back in Chicago. And the Chicago Alliance launched a campaign to demand accountability from their murderous CPD. Through mass organizing and canvassing, they were able to pass the ECPS ordinance, that's Empowering Communities for Public Safety ordinance. And this ordinance, it actually, like we talked about, or like Claudia Jones School talked about the gang database in MPD, in Chicago, they were using their own gang database that was also filled with, minors, people that were like loosely affiliated, and the city council prior to ECPS had told the police to stop using it, right? It is not accurate, it should not be used. They didn't care, they kept using it. It wasn't until ECPS was put in place that they forced the police to stop using it. And has since they are not allowed to use it and have not used it. So that is a material win coming from community control right then and there. Now, after ECPS, they just recently in February, late February, had elections for these police district councils. So basically, it's under CPAC, Civilian Police Accountability Council. Yeah, there's so many acronyms. But recently, they just had a huge landslide victory in Chicago. KB and I, we went out and canvassed into these neighborhoods, like predominantly black and brown, poor neighborhoods. And, we were met with people who, one, had no idea this was even happening, which was wild to hear because this is a, historic initiative. We have not gotten this far into community control as they have in Chicago. And the people that lived in the city have no idea this even happened, right? And that's on purpose. The local media, the news, they're not talking about this stuff. They wanted to slide it under the rug, and they had the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, their police union, canvass their own people, start campaigning to push people into these police district councils that were meant for working class people. And they tried that campaign, the Alliance, because they had taken so much time into organizing the people, they were able to win out in a landslide victory. If we can go on to the next slide, it'll talk about some of the victories from Chicago. So basically, these are some of the powers that the police district council members have. It's not exhaustive, but basically they have powers in hiring and firing of police officers, They have some power in like the oversight of the budget of police officers. They meet with the local commanders in their police district, and those commanders have to come. They take grievances from the people who are victims of police crimes. And I want to stress, the people that the Alliance supported, these people, they are working class people. They are victims of police crimes. If they're not outwardly a part of the Alliance, they are like definitely anti-cop, right? They understand the harm that police cause in their communities. And the FOP tried their best, but lost, embarrassingly, right? But that can only happen because they took the time into organizing, into joining the Alliance, into like doing the tabling, doing the like all the boring work that goes into organizing. They did it, and it had like a material victory in the end for them because of that. Yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to say on that part. Let's see. KB now will speak about the struggle here in DC.
And just real quick, thank you. Just real quick, can we go back to the last slide? So I just kind of want to emphasize this. There are 22 police districts within Chicago, and there are 3 of these council seats. So there were 66 positions, up for election, or up for the election essentially. And this election happened at the end of February. And so in 8 of the 22 districts, the movement for police accountability won all 3 seats. That means that working class Black and brown people who understand the material conditions of their community won all the seats in their district. And so what that does, and then in so in 6 districts, we won 2 out of the 3 seats. So we have, out of 66 people that were elected, about 45 of them are working class people that understand the material conditions, in which they are living, and are going to advocate not only for themselves but for their community. So, this is like, as John said, this was a historic initiative that we want to try to do in DC so that we can have the same gains, so that we can have the same political power over our communities and over our lives. So we can go on to the next slide, talk about the struggle in DC. So, some of our other comrades that have already presented have already talked about, the police terror and the violence, that has been occurring in DC. So the slide mentions that 3 people were shot in February 2023. Police have killed more people in 2021 than 2020. But even since we made this slide, we have 2 more police killings. We have the killing of Alante Scott, and then we have the killing of Delano Martin, which one of our comrades mentioned before. And these are just more examples of the violence and the terror and the repression that we're facing in our communities, that necessitate the need for community control, that necessitate the need for us to take our power back, to say we are in control of our lives, that it is not MPD, it is not Muriel Bowser, it is not Vincent Gray who is sponsoring police bill to increase the city budget for police. It is not them that should have the power and say over our lives and how our lives look and how we are, police and how our communities look. That power should be our power, and that's what the movement for community control focuses on. It focuses on this shift in power. So again, Claudia Jones talked extensively about the police surveillance and the repression of activists and organizers that has been, continuing and ongoing, the last several years. A prominent example is, one of our comrades, April Goggins of Black Lives Matter, who has been specifically targeted by the police for at least 5 years now, along with other Black Lives Matter activists and Black and brown activists that are fighting for justice and power in the city. I mentioned before that Vincent Gray, council member Ward 7, is sponsoring a police budget increase to add 900 officers onto the force, to add yearly salary, incentive bonuses for senior officers so that they remain on the force for another 5 years and terrorize our community for at least another 5 years. This bill calls for increasing the budgets for the cadets, increasing the budget, or not the budget, but increasing the bonuses for cadets, for new officers. All this money that could be used for our education, for our health, for our well-being, for social services that we need. All that money is being taken and is being funneled into the police to keep us safe by killing us. Make it make sense. It doesn't make sense to me. And as we talk about community control, we recognize that in DC, our material conditions are very unique because not only do we have, the MPD, which is one of the most well-funded, police in the entire country. Not only do we have like 26 different other, police organizations within the city, but DC also operates as a literal colony in the fact that we do not have statehood. That, as we recently saw, Congress can come in and even something as simple as modernizing, the criminal statutes is overturned, and that, democracy and the voice of, DC residents is thwarted by people who don't live here, who don't have any type of material basis in this city. So as we fight for community control, as we think about the idea of community control, we also have to keep in mind that we are also going to face a struggle simply for, statehood, for the ability to have, a ECPS bill, have it passed and not have it overturned or, usurped from us by, Congress and stuff like that. So we can go on to the next slide. There's actually, so something I always like to end with is Asada's, what is that? Asada's quote, Asada's prayer. We all know it. We have a duty to fight for our freedom. We have a duty to win. Y'all, yes, okay. So I'm gonna start this off. Give me 1 second. So we have a duty to fight for our freedom. We have a duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. I want y'all to say it with me. We have a duty to fight for our freedom. We have a duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. Now, look, y'all, I'm a hype person. Nah, I need y'all to clap yet because I need y'all to say it louder. I need you to say it with your chest, okay? Because this is a quote, but this is powerful because this is something that we should really live our lives by, and that we should engage in the struggle, by and with. So I need you to say it with your chest, okay?
For the new people, give it to us line by line. Repeat after me.
All right, line by line, repeat after me. We have a duty to fight for our freedom.
We have a duty to fight for our freedom.
We have a duty to win.
We have a duty to win.
We must love each other and support each other.
We must love each other and support each other.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
All right, do we have any questions real quick? Oh, never mind. All right, y'all. It's been real. Appreciate you.
Thank y'all. I really appreciate that presentation. We have a student organization from Howard University, Spirit of Sankofa, School for Revolutionary Thought. They're going to be talking about what's going on with the UR program. I can take the stage.
Peace, everybody. My name is Latrice.
Hello, welcome.
My pronouns are they, them. I'm a first-year Africana Studies major, gender and sexuality studies minor. I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota. Happy to be with you all today.
Peace, y'all. I'm Brother Anthony. I'm a fourth year Africana Studies major. Also, African Studies minor as well from Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
All right, and before I say a little bit about what our organization is and what it's about and what we do, I wanted to lead us all in a breath, just because some of the things that have been spoken about so far were triggering to my body, and I'm sure that they were triggering to other people as well. And so I want to lead us all in a breath because our nervous systems are affected by this work. And how can we expect ourselves to go out in the community and organize and evoke change if within ourselves we are traumatized and acting from a place of trauma? And so when we realize that our bodies are triggered, we need to do something about that. Whether that be, some people like taking bubble baths or going for a walk or eating some good food or talking to a friend. But I feel like in this space right now, it's most appropriate to breathe. All right, so go ahead and inhale, and exhale, inhale, and exhale, inhale, exhale, one more time, inhale, and exhale. Thank you all so much for doing that with me. Yeah, I just felt like it had to be done because I was sitting there and I was like, I'm on the brink of tears. And so I'll talk about our organization. So yes, we are a student organization, currently operate out of Howard University. Most of the students are from Howard. However, you don't have to be a Howard student to join. We are an African-centered organization, and a lot of the things that we do stem around Black liberation and this idea of operating from Sankofa, reaching back to go forward. So we really, really do pull from that deep well of African thought and ways of being. We value the things that our ancestors have created and what they did. And so that's what we use to guide everything that we do. So we engage in political education every week. We just finished Women's Liberation and the African Liberation Struggle, Women's Oppression by Thomas Sankara. I might have butchered that title, but y'all know what I mean. So we just finished that book, and we'll be reading other things as well, watching films, engaging in discussion, just things to build our political consciousness. We also operated a liberation school. It was a 6-week program with some high school students. And we also do movement building on Howard's campus. As you all may know, Howard has a very long history with radical organizing, and we intend to continue that legacy. And so in doing so, we collaborate with other revolutionary orgs on campus. And right now, we've been organizing about the DoD contract, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Sam, is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, and a couple other points I wanted to hit about so you guys can learn more about SOS. You all can also follow us on Instagram at Revolutionary SOS, but we also value Pan-Africanism. I didn't really hear that being talked about today, so we're going to talk about that a lot. I didn't hear the word Africa mentioned either, so we're going to talk about that a lot as well, and African identity as well, because Black tells you, what you look like, but it doesn't tell you what you are. And African identity in this society, really globally, has been suppressed for a reason, because our identity gives us power, right? So again, it's the spirit of Sankofa, because we have to spiritually, metaphysically feel our identity, and we have to go back and get our identity so we can ultimately get that freedom, right? So we also value communalism, right? So now, rather than socialism, really a Western articulation of this African economical system, we value this African centered expression and practice of communalism, communitarianism specifically. And then we also value self-determination as well. So again, we really do pull from this deep well of African thought. Again, this intellectual prowess of our ancestors, and we make sure we invoke this in any space that we're in. Because again, it's not just a material struggle that we're in. It's not just a mental struggle or intellectual struggle that we're in. It's a metaphysical struggle. It's a holistic struggle as well. So we have to have our whole community involved in our struggle. So we have to call upon our ancestors as well as calling upon the yet unborn as well to impact and influence our decisions in our everyday struggle.
Ashe, thank you. All right, we can go to the next slide. I'm going to be talking about the role of HBCUs in militarism. So this directly relates to the Stop Cop City initiative as well as the DoD contract. So yes, when it comes to our sustainable movement building, one thing that we've been organizing a lot around over the past few months is raising consciousness among the student body at Howard University about the $90 million that was given to Howard from the Department of Defense. Okay, and so this happened in January, and so we've been pretty much raising consciousness about that ever since. If you are not aware yet, I'll go ahead and summarize basically what the contract means and the implications for those of us who don't know. So over the span of 5 years, a university-affiliated research center, UARC, will be established at Howard University. We were picked to be the leader of the consortium amongst other HBCUs, and really playing into that idea of Black excellence and Howard University being the mecca, which is something that conscious students on campus we take issue with. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But Wayne Frederick, our president, is very excited about this opportunity. He wants Howard students to be recruited into this research center to produce, to contribute their knowledge and their talents and their brilliance toward developing technology. So things like facial recognition, surveillance, things like tactical autonomy, and other militaristic strategies to further impose the United States imperialist and militaristic interest. And this is something that we take issue with because we realize just how fundamentally anti-African you must be in order to be okay with allowing your students, I'm talking about Wayne Frederick, to allow your students to essentially sell out and contribute to the exponential loss of life of African people, not just abroad and when it comes to like AFRICOM, but also domestically. We know that the technologies and things that would be improved under this UARC is free game for the police to use. So when it comes to Cop City, that I feel like it has a direct correlation in that this is a compound in Atlanta that is being set up to better learn how to train police to kill Black people and control our movements. And so I guess my point is just that it wouldn't make sense for us as students to be organizing against the UARC without also being conscious about Cop City. So I feel like they're linked, and we gotta attack militarism from all sides. So yeah, when it comes to critique and action, that has to be a priority. Let me see if I'm missing anything. Oh yeah, let me talk a little bit about the Black excellence thing. So yeah, one of the things that we were taking issue with is that the fact that Howard University said yes to this type of contract, the fact that they want to train their students up in order to contribute to the Imperial Corps is deeply contradictory. How can you claim to be for Black excellence or wanting Black people to be free in this country, but you're allowing students to contribute technologies in order to make the methods and the strategies that the police and that the military use against us stronger? It makes no sense. It's illogical. And so yeah, that's pretty much our issue. And yeah. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Oh yeah, do you want to comment?
Yeah. And one thing I would also add is another thing that in SOS we pull from like our Africana psychologists, our ancestors like Francis Cress Wilson, Amos Wilson, Bobby E. Wright, Linda James Myers, right? We pull from these thinkers because so much of our struggle is also our questioning of the various modes of knowledge that exist, the logicalities that exist in our society that we assume as universal truth, right? So the tree, she talked about the science. A lot of people wouldn't see anything wrong with the technology being developed or the science that's being used, right? But it's important that we understand that because this comes from a tradition of thought that, you know, we Africans being colonized in America, we have accepted, and we have to move against this thought because even if we get, you know, a liberated African society, a new Africa, if we don't deal with the thought, our abilities to conceptualize reality, so much of our efforts are going to unfortunately be co-opted, and we're going to eventually, you know, create more repressive systems in our, you know, free and justified society as well.
Yes, the importance of Sankofa is clear on that. So now we're going to be talking about agents of liberalism. This was something that we did have Sister Becca, who was going to come here and present with us, but she couldn't make it today. She sent me something to read for you all. So these are words for Sister Becca on the colonial agent. The tricky part about Stacey Abrams and other Black members who occupy the larger National Democratic Party is that she and others have the outward appearance of being for African people in this country. But she in fact represents and carries out policies that are indeed the exact opposite. As Kwame Ture reiterated in his analysis of the African bourgeoisie, the neo-colonial class, the African bourgeoisie seeks luxury in the midst of mass struggle. And as soon as they arrive at a position based on the blood of the people, they snatch that position up and run away from the people. On June 15th in 2020, during a CNN interview, Stacey Abrams, when asked about the need to defund the policing apparatus in this nation, she responded by saying, "We must reallocate resources for the public good and for the humanization of Black communities." She concluded the statement by further calling to an end to the extrajudicial killings in our country. If we can all recall, this was at the climax of the nationwide George Floyd protests and Black Lives Matter movement national resurgence. All in those two years of all talk and no material transformation for African people in this country in relation to police genocide, Abrams released a television ad in response to Republican claims that she was anti-police, and to increase voter popularity in the 2022 Georgia Senate race. In the ad, she pledged her support for law enforcement. She listed various agencies that she worked with as a legislator, and then went on to say that if elected governor, she would raise the base salaries of some law enforcement officers and expand training for officers who specialize in mental health and social services as a part of her public safety plan. What Stacey Abrams and her neoliberal supporters fail to understand is that African people in this country cannot escape state violence through aid from oppressive institutions of the larger imperialist system. That is illogical. The deeply rooted history between state social services agencies in relation to the destruction of the Black family and the larger strength of our community is purposefully buried in conversations like these to confuse us and instill trust in America and American concessions. What does our unshaken allegiance to a political party that historically and contemporarily participated in our collective demise as an African people right here on this soil and throughout the diaspora say about our political maturity? Why are we celebrating the appointment of Stacey Abrams as endowment chair at Howard University? We must be operating out of a place of insanity and backwardness. This all speaks to the danger of seeking representation within an oppressive society rather than revolutionizing and cremation of the unjust system. There must be a collective understanding of neo-colonialism and the way representation has been weaponized against our people, period. These people who pose as the Black political and economic saviors of our communities, celebrity idols, NBA and NFL role models of our children, have no loyalty to the working and poor Africans in this country who are barely surviving day in and day out. These puppets, engaged in political theater and masquerading, are the vital force that sustains our collective exploitation, and so down with them. The main goal of neocolonialism is to maintain the colony without the physical presence of the imperialist master. In this case, the white man, the American European. The other goal of neocolonialism is to confuse the masses and make them seek entry into the larger exploitative system. As Kwame Nkrumah declared, neocolonialism is the last stage of imperialism. The eradication of neocolonialism is interchangeably linked to our liberation as a people, and we must now become disillusioned. The future of the nation depends on it. All right, so that's what she had to say about agents of liberalism.
So this slide is really going to be talking about what we can and can't afford to do, right, in our struggle right now. So it's important that we call on ancestors like Kwame Nkrumah, right? And Kwame Nkrumah, he believed in the African personality, the African identity. One of his famous quotes is, "I'm not African because I was born in Africa. Rather, I'm African because Africa was born in me," right? And for SOS and our organizing, right, our political organizing, we believe that Africa has to be born in you. That spirit, the African flame. Sister Latrice, she mentioned the deep well of African thought. You have to consistently pull from that deep well. You have to consistently go towards your ancestors for the solutions of your problems now. Because everything is historical, right? And if everything is historical, that means we can learn lessons from our ancestors, right? Past actions. And that's important for us, right? So we're going to be talking about what we can and what we can't afford to do. So one of the things that we're really going to focus on now is Pan-Africanism, right? The ways in which Pan-Africanism has been co-opted, right? It has been commodified. It has become like a personality trait, essentially, right? So a lot of our Pan-African movements have essentially, died in the 21st century, and we have to really, internationalize and intergenerationalize our struggle, our Pan-African struggle, right, and get back on track towards liberation of Africa. And that's very important for us because, one of our slogans really in SOS is Black visibility ain't Black power, right? And that's very important for us because we would say, oh, Pan-Africanism is living. The president of Ghana, he's upholding the Pan-African flame, the Pan-African tradition, because, he's essentially liberating the people of Ghana. He's in power, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not true at all because, again, if we apply this slogan of Black visibility and Black power to, our struggle in North America, specifically in the States, we'll see people like Barack Obama, we'll see people like Stacey Abrams, people like Kamala Harris, and we'll see this relationship between the exploitation of African masses and the rise of a few Africans, right? So with Barack Obama in particular, coming through the Democratic Party, essentially becoming the president or the head of state in America, if we see his international, right, engagement with African people, specifically in Africa, we'll see AFRICOM, we'll see the bombing and the exponential loss of African life in East Africa, Somalia and Mozambique in particular, and we'll say, hold up, wait, he's supposed to be African, he's supposed to be Black. How can Black people be killing Black people domestically and abroad, right? But again, he's the head of this imperial core. We're in the metropolitan state right now. And just because we see an African or a Black person, rather, an American Negro even more so in control or in power, allegedly working for the people, that doesn't mean they're going to be for the people. And that's important because we can apply that analysis to Pan-Africanism with the president of Ghana, for instance. Meeting with Kamala Harris, talking about he wants to unify all of Africa. But if you unify all of Africa, then what's going to come after that, right? So then we have to pull from thinkers, our ancestors in the past, our revolutionary ancestors, specifically like Kwame Nkrumah. He said what? Neocolonialism is the last stage of imperialism. Going back to our original topic about the role of the HBCU, the complicity of Black people, Africans specifically, and Black subjugation globally, that's important for us to be able to analyze and then to also question ourselves, right? So part of what I want to leave you guys is what I often like to ask people who claim that they're Pan-Africanists. What is your commitment and what is your sacrifice to the liberation of African people? Because there's no country in the world, there's no people in the world that can exist without Africa being subjugated, exploited, right? Africa is the wealthiest continent on the planet. African people are the wealthiest people on the planet in terms of culture, in terms of labor productivity, etc., in terms of intellectual prowess, right? So if this is the relationship between Africa and the world, then again, what is your commitment to the eradication of that relationship, right? And that's so important to us because we can't afford to be, pseudo-Pan-Africanists, right, or faux Pan-Africanists. We have to speak to the ancestors and ultimately view the world on our own terms, right? And for me, that means drinking from that deep well of African thought, the teachings of our ancestors consistently, every day, uncompromisingly so. We have to be uncompromising in our struggle and our analysis. And if we can go to the next slide, right? what we must do, or rather what we must get to, is revolutionary organizing, right? Through drinking from the deep well of African thought, in the words of Jacob's Carruthers. So we have to join these revolutionary organizations, right? Like the Black Alliance for Peace, like the All African People's Revolutionary Party, like PACA, right? Like BAP, like GMDC. We have to join these revolutionary organizations, and we have to uphold the tradition of Pan-Africanism, right? So we have to be in constant alignment, Ma'atian alignment with our ancestors, right? And when we're in that alignment with our ancestors, the revolution will come. The recreation of our society where African people can just exist, it'll come. But we have to be in alignment with our ancestors. It's just not a physical struggle. It's just not a mental struggle. It's a holistic struggle. It has to be a corporation of all the aspects of our being, all the aspects of our culture.
Thank y'all. The future is bright, as we can see. So we have our last live presentation from Anak Bayan, one of our Filipino comrades, going to be speaking to their situation. Unfortunately, the Palestinian youth movement couldn't make it out to DC today. They were going to present and talk a little bit about the Daily Exchange Program, but that's something to write down, the Deadly Exchange Program, dealing with Palestine. So yeah, we have Alex about to present for us. This is our last live presentation, but we're going to have a video after this. A comrade in Atlanta that's on the ground will be giving us a report and update on Cop City and the movement to stop Cop City. So stick around.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Okay, so thank you for the intro, Rashid. My name is Alex. I am a member of Anak Bayan DC. We are the DC chapter of an overseas youth organization, and what we do is we fight for the liberation of Filipino people at home in the Philippines and here in the US by mobilizing Filipino youth and allies to fight against US militarism, corruption in the Philippines, and do political education to learn about the true nature of Philippine society and the US-Filipino, the relationship between the US and the Philippines. So we believe that the Philippines is neither truly free nor democratic, and the majority of people are still suffering and subjugated under a land-owning imperialist class that's a holdover, land-owning imperialist capitalist class that's a holdover from the Spanish colonization. So now I will go over a little bit of the history of the Philippines. So pre-colonial Philippines was doing its thing. It was not one single nation. And it was a bunch of separate different societies living together until the Spanish came in the 1500s and colonized the Philippines. So the entire archipelago was under Spanish rule for about 300 years. That was from 1500s until 1898. During the Spanish-American War, Spain ceded the Philippines, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and Guam to the United States. Cuba got independence, Philippines eventually got independence, and Puerto Rico and Guam still do not have independence, and they're fighting for their own independence from the United States to this day. So through World War II, from 1898 till 1946, the Philippines was ruled by the U.S. And during that time, the United States, the United States had a heavy military presence there, and they established a lot of the public institutions, including the schools in the Philippines, and stripped away a lot of what the native Filipino people had desired / established for their own country, for their own republic. So finally, the Philippines got independence from the United States. And so I'm linking this back to increased militarism in internationally and at home, and including Cop City. So anyways, 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty between the United States and the Philippines, where they pledged to defend each other in the event of an attack on either one's nation. But that doesn't really mean anything for the United States. It just means that for the Philippines, they need to host American military and allow them to carry out their operations to maintain global dominance in the Pacific region. So fast forward, in 1999, there was passed the Visiting Forces Agreement. So that allowed for U.S. troops to be only tried by U.S. law when they commit crimes in the Philippines. Philippine court system, Philippine laws don't apply to them. Right. Okay. So that's bad because basically American military personnel can get away with whatever they want. And if they commit any crimes, like most notably and recurringly violence against women, rape, sexual assault, of people who live near the military bases, they can just be sent back to the U.S. without any harm done to them. So in 2014, there was the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. And so that allowed for military personnel, U.S. military, to stay on bases in the Philippines and rotate out for a period of 6 months. So it technically states that the U.S. can't have any permanent military bases in the Philippines, but effectively they are permanent because there are a large amount of troops that stay there for 6 months at a time, but they just rotate out. So there's a continuous American military presence on the archipelago, and they're, what am I saying here? The Americans can build new infrastructure, so they can build new runways, they can build permanent infrastructure that's not going anywhere, all for the purpose of making sure that the U.S. has its footprint in the Pacific, so that it can quickly attack or provoke China, so that it can monitor what's going on between Taiwan and China. And in the event of a war with China, the Philippines would just suffer because it would be part of where the armed conflict was actually happening, that the U.S. is provoking, but not the Filipino people. So anyways, we're now here to today. So just recently, 4 new bases were opened in the Philippines, increased militarism in the Philippines. The United States has pledged money to help with joint military exercises between the U.S. military and the Philippine military, and also pledged money to help with the with the Philippines counterterrorism efforts. So just like there are movements of resistance in the United States and other countries against oppressors, against corrupt powers, so too exist in the Philippines, including Anak Bayan organization that I'm in. There's also community members of our organization in the Philippines. So they too are being arrested for activism. They too are, for protesting against the government, which the United States supports. They too are being followed by police. They too are being arrested on false charges and imprisoned without due process. And this, strong relationship between the U.S. military and militarism in the Philippines, it just represents, I think, well, not represents, but it is what the U.S. Is all about. So counterterrorism efforts, the same ones that are used to suppress activists here, are being taught to Filipino military members abroad, and will be used on the Filipino people. Yeah. So, the president of the Philippines is coming to Washington, D.C. on May 1st, and he's going to meet with President Biden and a bunch of other U.S. officials to, strengthen their relationship and, I guess just confirm, yes, hooray, we're expanding military in the Philippines. Our relationship is very great. We being the U.S., we will support you, your government's agenda, and we will continue to provide support for your military as long as we have access to your land for the purpose of waging our war. So we don't agree with that. So we're going to be holding a protest on May 1st when we get more details about where President Marcos is actually going to be. Now it's call to action time. On May 1st, we're going to have a protest and action. Please be there. If you can make it, for updates, you can follow our Instagram, which is DC. Just like that. Yeah. And let's see, what else?
Did you get the location?
We don't know the location yet. We're going to post those details soon. We just found out that he was coming literally a couple of days ago. So we're trying to mobilize and make a plan quickly to show that we don't support the Philippine government, we don't support the U.S. government, and we condemn the alliance between the two oppressive regimes. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, and Bayan, and thank you for everyone who's been here and holding strong. So we have one more presentation from someone on the ground in Atlanta to talk about the Cop City, what's going on with Cop City and the movement to stop it. 1 second while we set up.
My name is Tuesday Salazar, and I am an organizer based in Atlanta. So we're community movement builders, and I was asked to speak a little bit about Cop City. So the Atlanta city government has leased 381 acres of forest land to the Atlanta Police Foundation, which is a shady organization that corporations use to funnel money to police. The APF plans to spend over $90 million, at least $33.5 million of which will be from taxpayers, and the rest will come from corporations, to build the biggest police training facility in the country. It's going to have a landing pad for Black Hawk helicopters, a mock city or mock cities to practice urban warfare and crowd control, and also a shooting range. It's also going to have places to detonate explosive devices, as well as bars, restaurants, and places to live. This all sounds a lot like a playground for the police, and so, it's been nicknamed or dubbed Cop City by um, protesters, neighborhood members, neighbors, and people opposed to the project. And really, the rationale that the city gave when it decided to, share the news about the project was that it would be a morale boost for the police. Really, and they gave that announcement right after the uprisings against police violence that came in 2020. And we know that Cop City would be used to subdue popular uprisings, right? It would be used to learn tactics and strategies to stop future uprisings and movements against police violence. So it's slated to be built in an area known as Weelaunee Forest or the South River Forest, which is the largest urban forest in the country. It's on territory that was stolen from the Muskogee Creek people in the 1800s, then gifted to a plantation owner who enslaved people and forced them to work the land. And then later it was used by the city of Atlanta as a prison farm for so-called crimes of poverty. So Cop City would bulldoze this area, which is some of the last forest land in Atlanta. This project would impact the mostly Black working class neighborhoods nearby. Folks there are surrounded by other jails. Their streets flood from little to no green space, or too little green space, and they hear gunshots at all hours of the day and night from a police shooting range that has already been there for years. So this project would continue to militarize the police in Atlanta and, more broadly um, across the country, really, and militarize them in urban warfare tactics to further control, colonize, incarcerate, and terrorize poor and working class African Black people. So as you can imagine, the neighbors in the area overwhelmingly reject the project. And we've learned that this training center won't just be training Atlanta police or Georgia police. Some internal documents that were discovered through FOIA requests showed that 43% of the police um, that they plan to train in Cop City will be from outside of the state, possibly outside of the country. And the project is really part of a longer history of repression in the state response to organized Black masses and uprisings. So, we are also aware that there's a movement to stop Cop City and defend the Atlanta forest, which includes neighborhood groups, environmentalists, civil liberties lawyers, and law students, and students in general, right? Like we've seen a lot of protests from folks at, Spelman and Morehouse and Georgia State, Emory and Agnes Scott, Clark Atlanta, right? So students are part of this movement. They're also abolitionists and Black activists and organizers. And so the movement has had very traditional organizing campaigns to start off with earlier on in the movement. There have been marches and demonstrations and rallies, as well as town halls, petition drives, and call-ins to local city council people in the mayor's office. And even in the early stages of the movement, there were 19 people from various rallies who were charged with either resisting arrest or obstruction of governmental administration. But after the Atlanta City Council passed an ordinance to lease to the Atlanta Police Foundation to tear down the 90 acres of forest, then the tactics changed a bit, and groups of folks decided to move into the forest to do direct action, right? By stopping or potentially stopping trees from getting cut down and protecting the forest, right? And really, the forest became another area of struggle, um, you know, linking the acts of police violence with climate justice and, really just the struggle to protect the forest in general, right? Um, and so, uh, the Atlanta Police Department, the DeKalb County Police Department, and the force is mostly in DeKalb County, right? So, Atlanta and DeKalb, Fulton County rather, and DeKalb County are linked, right? The Fulton County Prosecutor's Office, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and then also the Federal Bureau of Investigation and Homeland Security, all tied in with the local governments who are using their power and overreach and breadth to criminalize organizers and activists who are trying to stop this project, are all involved in, the efforts against this movement, this Stop Cop City or Defend the Atlanta Forest movement, right? And we know that this is really how modern warfare is structured, right? You have different military branches and intelligence agencies swapping notes and tactics, as well as sharing resources in order to occupy and underdeveloped areas across the world, right? So, we've seen, these different security apparatuses and branches and military branches and intelligence agencies work together. And then the state also decided to further criminalize the movement to stop Cop City by arresting forest defenders who were, at the time of their arrest, doing nothing more than just sitting in tree huts and tents, right? And these folks were charged with domestic terrorism. Um, and so, we've seen uh, um, a lot of support for those folks who have been charged with domestic terrorism, which is a pretty serious charge. It's really only been used against um, participants in this movement in Georgia, right? The statute was enacted after, um, Dylan Roof did, I guess, murdered those folks in Charleston, and it hasn't really been used since that time. But we know that a lot of these terrorism charges are used to target our folks. So, and right before the city council voted to pass the lease, there was the second largest call-in period in the history of the Atlanta City Council. The only larger call-in period was when Rayshard Brooks was killed here in Atlanta in 2020, and there was a debate around a possible piece of legislation to bring down police violence. But this one related to Cop City was the second most number of calls um, that were listened that took place over 17 hours, and 70% of those who did call in were opposed to Cop City, and those numbers would have been higher if it weren't for the fact that police officers and firemen called in during that time period as well, and skewed the numbers slightly to show that there was more support for Cop City. Um, but in the community, there have been other surveys taken, and some have said that over 90% or close to 90% of those folks in the nearby neighborhoods are opposed. We have done canvassing in those neighborhoods, community movement builders, and in those communities, we've done town halls, we've done events, and the overwhelming reaction has been that this forest was promised to the community for use by the community, right, intact. And so, folks are against this project. Um, so, we understand that as a movement, there has to be, you know, um, public opinion involved. And so, we've obviously held these rallies and demonstrations to show support for stopping Cop City, because we know if we leave it up to the state, if we leave it up to the courts, right, the courts are going to side for the most part with the police and the state agency. And so that's why we continue to organize and support the folks who were arrested as part of the larger movement and as people who need to be protected in the future. So it was in December that the first forest raid was done. And in that raid, 6 or 7 folks were grabbed out of the forest and charged with domestic terrorism. And then on January 18th, the state repeated that with another raid. And again, those policing agencies included the Atlanta Police Department, DeKalb County Police Department, interagency SWAT teams, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Georgia State Troopers, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, and that was the raid when they arrested more forced offenders, and Tortuguita, had a tent that was away from some of the other forced offenders, and they were able, they murdered Tortuguita, right? They killed him. They at first claimed that he had shot first, and then they, in self-defense, shot back. But all of the autopsies, the results of the autopsies that have been released since that have all shown that there was no gunpowder residue on Tortuguita's hands, and so he couldn't, by all accounts, have shot at them. And so, we know that police lie, and so that's been a significant, I guess, date or occurrence or event in the movement. On January 18th, actually on March 5th, more recently, well, actually, to go back to Tortuguita, we know that the city of Atlanta police are required to have their body cameras on when they interact with the public. And, somehow there's video evidence of the surrounding events of that January 18th date, right? Of other tents and people being raided, but not of the raid that led to the killing of the young organizer Tortuguita. The police themselves on their videotapes said that they heard suppressed fire, which is code word for police fire, right? But, no one in the community said that they heard a single shot and then a return to gunfire, which was their narrative, right? And so, we learned very recently that, there were 57 gunshot wounds or holes in Tortuguita's body in the autopsy that was done by the DeKalb County. And so, this is a pretty significant event, and it shows, the level of, just the lengths that the state is going to go to make sure that this project is successful, and kind of what's to come if they are able to build Cop City. And so, we are, understanding that, right, this statute of domestic terrorism, which is really broad in nature, right? And, as I mentioned earlier, sat on the books for 5 or 6 years before it was actually used, right, for the first time against organizers who were sitting in the streets of South Cop City, right? It's really never been tested before. And, we think it's more of a scare tactic than anything else, that it's a way to criminalize the movement, right? To make the public think that the folks involved in the movement are somehow domestic terrorists, as opposed to organizers and activists and folks fighting to stop the militarized training center. The folks who are facing these charges, if convicted, could face upwards of 25 years in prison. But we've, spoken to defense lawyers who said the charge is baseless. And so, we're just looking to support these folks as much as possible. But just to go back to some of the timeline, on March 5th, a group of 200 protesters marched onto the proposed training center site and destroyed several pieces of equipment and infrastructure, and police responded by arresting and charging 23 individuals at a music festival about 1.5 kilometers away. They charged those individuals, the 23, with domestic terrorism, and 2 legal observers were included in the 23 number. And from what we understand, the evidentiary claims for those charges were even flimsier than previous charges. Like they cited mud on their clothing, on the clothing of the arrestees as a reason for a lot of the arrests. So, we are, seeing this domestic terrorism issue is, pretty serious. There are defense campaigns that are being built up to support our comrades who are dealing with this scare tactic. Um, and, typically, right, like folks who engage in these types of activities could be given like a trespass charge or something that could be labeled civil disobedience. But this is a public forest, right, public land. So there's nothing really. We don't understand the criminal intent, the intent behind charging folks for these kinds of severe charges, other than to harass, terrorize, and scare folks away from the movement. Um, and really, there's been an ongoing debate, right, around the use of the term terrorism, right, and like the legality of who is and who isn't a terrorist. Um, and so, like they speak about Assad Shakur, for example, as a terrorist, right, and Al Qaeda is terrorist too. And how can we equate, the actions and motives of these disparate forces, these disparate people, right? So we think there's like an intentional vagueness, right? And so even in the Georgia statute around domestic terrorism, there's a lot of vagueness. It's ill-defined. And it seems like terrorism and violence are terms that are reserved for people who fight back against the state, no matter how much violence the state uses through its security agencies, its policing agencies, domestically and internationally, right? No matter how much violence, they're never termed violent. Um, they're never seen it or talked about as terrorists or seen as enacting terrorism upon people, right? Those are only terms reserved for our people, right? And so, we should look closely and deeply at not only the state use of that type of terminology, that type of propaganda, but also the purpose of teaming corporate media and the state in terms of similar goals and objectives. But yeah, thanks y'all.
All right, y'all. So I'm gonna just give some closing remarks. Sorry, I don't like stands. All right, there we go. So thank you to all the groups that came out and presented today. PACA, Black Alliance for Peace and the Forest Defenders, Anak Bayan, Claudia Jones School for Political Education, Revolutionary SOS, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, and Frizzo and the DC Alliance. Everyone had, something else to add on, something else to build on. And coming out of this, that's exactly what I want us to do. I want us to build on the momentum that we have today, and to build into our work. I also want to mention the African People's Socialist Party, which has recently come under political attack by the FBI. I want to mention Omari Yeshiteli, Penny Jones Hess, Jesse Neville, and Augustus Romaine Jr., aka Ghazi Kodzo, who are 4 people who were indicted, for acting as Russian agents, for simply, using their so-called political free speech. So coming out of this, I think that we're all relatively advanced people in this room. You feel me? But the movement that we're fighting for, the movement for revolution, for power, for justice, it can't end here. And to build that movement, we have to build a mass movement That means that we have to build with people outside of the room that we're in now. We have to build, with people that are not going to be automatically aligned with our, political views or political persuasion. So, as much as this is a teaching, this was a, space of gathering and of learning. This is also a space that we need to use to organize further so that we can have political power and control over our lives, so that we are in control, so that the state is not the one that is dictating the conditions of our lives to us, that we dictate our conditions. And the only way that we can do that, the only way we can achieve that is through a mass revolutionary movement. So, I want to speak to everyone that spoken that was up here and that spoke. I encourage y'all to join the Alliance. The Alliance is, as we said, a mass defense organization. So, to do that, we all need to be bound together in some way. And I just want to end with a little chat. So, or not a chant. So, y'all can just stand up for me real quick. If you can't stand, you can just stand up for me real quick. So, I'm gonna do the "I believe we will win" chat. So,
how do people join the Alliance?
How do people join the Alliance? People can join the Alliance by going to Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Type in @DCARPR, and you should be able to find us. Also, you can find us on NARPR. That's NAARPR.org. So we're going to do the "I believe we will win" chant. If you was with our Palestinian comrades a couple weeks ago, they did this. This was lit. So, it's very simple. But we're going to start off real low, real slow, and then we're going to pump it up. All right? All right. I believe that we will win. 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 Come on, y'all. I believe that we will win. 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 Thank you, y'all. Thank you for your time. This is amazing. It's a great event. Y'all have a good day.
All right, thank y'all. Don't leave too quick. We have another event coming up at 3:00. We'll have the iconic author Carol Boston Weatherford here. She's authored books on Fannie Lou Hamer, on Arturo Schomburg, and on different events that have happened to Black people, people of color that you want to stick around for and hear her speak about. If you want to talk to some of the organizers, I wonder if they'll be still outside. Yeah, okay, so the organizers will be outside. You can stick around also and learn more how you can get involved. Thank you guys so much for coming out.